Welcome to Strange Dimensions, the interface to alternate realities, contact experiences, and mysterious phenomena. And now your host for Strange Dimensions Radio, here's Rosemary Ellen Guiley.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me tonight. We have a thought-provoking show in store for you. Tonight, we're going to venture into the skies, into UFOs, and contact with alien beings. My guest tonight, Ryan Sprague, is one of those individuals who's poking around in the corners of ufology and contact experiences, trying to get to the bottom of everything. I'll be introducing Ryan in just a few minutes. I want to comment a little bit on ufology and sort of an overview of what's been going on in the field. The modern ufology field really took shape not very long ago in the aftermath of World War II with the seminal event in 1947 when pilot Kenneth Arnold observed several unknown silvery flying discs near Mount Rainier in Washington state. And not that we hadn't had contact experiences before that, but that event was a seminal event and was one of the things that really ignited a lot of interest in alien contact. The media coined the term flying saucers. That didn't come from Arnold. And a new era was born. And by the way, I might add that it was Arnold's experience that led to the founding of Fate magazine. It was one of the important events leading to that. And Ray Palmer and Curtis Fuller were the co-founders of that. Raymond Palmer was the editor of Amazing Stories. Curtis Fuller was an editor with extensive experience, and they were both fascinated by all things unusual and unknown. And in its early years, Fate magazine had a major emphasis on ufology. It still does. In fact, Fate Radio is right here on KGRA, and you can tune in to that, check the show schedule for that. Now, I was 6 years old when I turned a crude little handheld telescope onto the full moon, and I was absolutely in awe of the wonders of the lunar landscape. And so, like many others who had peered into the skies or had some unusual experiences, this ignited in me a passionate interest to study the skies and what's going on with our place in the cosmos. I studied astronomy, and by extension, I got into space exploration, UFOs, and alien contact. And decades later, I'm still at it. And my most recent activities, as many of you know, involve my research on the jinn and their role in ET contact and especially abduction experiences. And also my participation now as a member of the board of directors and the research committee of the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. FREE has conducted the largest ever global survey of experiencers and has published some astounding findings about what's happening to people when they encounter non-human intelligence. You can, by the way, get all the results of that survey and a lot of articles at the website experiencer.org. Now, overall, in the decades that have passed since the Kenneth Arnold sighting, we've had mountains of research done. Looking into the reality of alien beings, visits, and craft. We've examined crashed and landed saucers, trace evidence, craft and lights in the sky, abductions, benevolent and negative contact experiences, conspiracy, and a whole lot more. But are we any closer to knowing what's really going on? That's why I'm excited to have Ryan Sprague on the show tonight because, as I mentioned, he's been doing some research in this field, investigating and interviewing a lot of different kinds of experts and experiencers as well. He's even had his own childhood experience that we'll find out more about. And tonight he's going to share his thoughts and findings from his new book, Somewhere in the Skies, A Human Approach to an Alien Phenomenon, which was recently published, I'd like to add, by the Richard Dolan Press. Richard has a very popular show here on KGRA. Ryan presented recently at the International UFO Congress in Fort McDowell, Arizona. I was there. He was enthusiastically received by the audience. So I'm sure we're going to see more from Ryan in the coming years on the topic of UFOs, contact, and non-human intelligence interaction with human beings. A little more about Ryan. He's a playwright, screenwriter, and actor, as well as author. He's originally from Syracuse. He studied acting and playwriting at Oswego State University, and 2 years on the road acting for the National Theater of Arts and Education. He now lives in New York City. He's a frequent contributor to the Nuance Theater Company and Dreamcatcher Entertainment, and is a screenwriter and co-producer of upcoming short films. Website, go for more information at somewhereintheskies.com. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for being with me tonight.
My absolute pleasure, Rosemary. I met you at the Congress for the first time ever, and it was truly an honor. I've been following your work for years and years now, so to be on here with you tonight is just my pleasure. So thank you. Well,
it was definitely a pleasure to have our vendor tables right next to each other, and I really enjoyed getting acquainted with you. And I'd been hearing about Somewhere in the Skies myself, too, so I think it was a little bit of fate there that got us together. What were your thoughts on the Congress? You've been to other UFO Congresses. It's one of the major events in ufology where a lot of researchers showcase their latest and best research and findings. What were your thoughts about this year's Congress?
Yeah, so I'd been volunteering for the Congress for many years now, backstage doing the audio work. So I've heard every lecture of the UFO Congress for at least the past 5 years, which is a very serendipitous thing. And this year I was asked to speak, so that was very exciting. This year's Congress was really something to see, something to hear. We heard from a vast array of people this year on many different topics. You know, Colonel Charles Halt was there talking about the Rendlesham case. We had someone speaking about the Heselton Lights phenomenon, which is very intriguing. And it really ran the gamut. We had the anniversary of the Phoenix Lights, so we had a panel of actual witnesses who spoke. So yeah, Rosemary, it was really exciting. I got to meet a lot of new people, and like you said, we were right next to each other with Mr. David Weatherly, who I just adore his work as well. So yes, it was a quite rewarding experience, and I can't wait to hopefully get backstage and do the audio again next year.
Well, I like to go to the Congress every year because, as I mentioned, it is one of the best showcases for latest in research. It's a terrific place for networking. And folks, if you've ever wanted to go to a UFO conference, it's definitely one that should be on your to-do list. There are several others around America and some internationally as well that are equally as good. I always love going to Arizona in the wintertime, and it's in a spectacular setting as well. Very good for sky watching, although this year I didn't see anything unusual in the skies. I have in the past. So, as I mentioned, Ryan, I was intrigued by the fact that you, like so many researchers in the field, had a childhood experience that, really got you going with curiosity in this area. What happened to you?
Yeah, the origin story. I did have a personal sighting when I was 12 years old. This was in 1995. And I was on a weekend getaway with my parents to the St. Lawrence River, which runs all through upstate New York and sort of borders Canada. And I was fishing. I loved to fish as a kid. It was very calming for me. And I'd often put on my headphones and listen to Green Day, my favorite band. And it was just my time. It was my time. I was a very solace sort of kid. And I was fishing. It had just turned dark, and I noticed these 3 white lights reflecting in the water, so I'm curious. I look up, and there's this triangular formation, this prototypical triangle that we know of today with the hazy red light in the middle. This one was probably more like a sun. It was very hard to look at, very bright. It hurt my eyes, and I couldn't see any type of structure, but I also couldn't see the stars behind it. So, I ripped my headphones off. I'm expecting to hear this thing, but there was nothing, Rosemary. It was completely silent. And all I could hear was the water hitting the dock. And I could feel this, I don't know how to really describe it. It was like a vibration running through my back of my ears, down through my spine, into my lower back. And at this point, I'm terrified. I scream for my dad to come outside. He's inside of our hotel that we're staying at. He finally comes out and he sees the tail end of this thing as it's floating over the water and making its way towards the Canadian border. So he sees the tail end and he thinks it's just a plane. That's what he tells me. But I knew different. I'd seen it directly over my head. It made no noise. And like I said, it petrified me. I was 12 years old. I never experienced anything like that. I had no interest in UFOs before that. And I became obsessed after that. I started going to the library in Syracuse, New York, where I'm from, and taking out book after book. And it was just down the rabbit hole from there, I'd say.
Did your father ever become convinced that it was not an airplane?
That event in particular, I don't think so. I think he was, doing his job as a father, protecting me and, putting me at ease. But through the years, as I've sort of continued my research and shared that with my parents, who I have to add are very supportive of this, both this topic and my dive into it. I think I've convinced them in one way or another that there is something out there, or some things, we should say. I don't believe there's any singular answer to the UFO phenomenon, which I'm sure we'll get to, but they are very open-minded, and the more I tell my father about these experiences and these people I've spoken to, the more I think he's starting to rethink that entire night, whether it was man-made, some sort of top-secret technology, or something extraterrestrial. I think he's open to. But I can't fault him for trying to put my mind at ease that night, for sure.
Well, that's one of the things that we run into in the field all the time, is that people have these experiences that fall outside their worldview, what should be normal, natural, and explainable. And sometimes it takes some people a long time to come around to rethinking those experiences. Now, in Somewhere in the Skies, you've covered quite a range of incidents in the field, from lights in the sky to abductions. You've interviewed all kinds of people. What can someone expect when they pick up this book and start delving into it?
So I like to describe the book, Rosemary, as something a little different. When I came to Richard Dolan about publishing a book with him, he asked me, cool, what do you want to write about? And I honestly, at that time, I had no idea. I just knew I wanted to write a book, and I wanted it to be about the UFO phenomenon, something that I felt so keenly and passionate about. And so we sort of navigated the maze from there. What new and fresh ideas could we bring to the table to further the conversation? And as a playwright here in New York, I told him I'm fascinated by people. My job as a playwright is to create characters, to get into their minds, to see how they react, see how they change. So I infused that into my mission with the book, and that was to focus on the individuals having the experiences. We always hear of dates and times and size of craft, but I wanted to focus on the witnesses and the experiencers. What do they think happened to them, other than what did the author or the UFO researcher think happened to them? Let's hear from the people. Let's see the impact these events have had on their lives. So that's what I did. I interviewed probably over 200 or so people. I narrowed it down to a few dozen or so and really put the microscope on these people. What were their beliefs before? How did their beliefs change after the event? What did their family members think? Their community? And it was exciting, at times heartbreaking, and I really wanted to do that. I wanted to infuse my playwriting skills, as it were, and infuse that into my UFO research. And I think that's the culmination of what the book really represents.
Well, this really puts a human face on contact experiences and on the field in general. And this is something that we've focused on at the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, is what's going on with the individuals and how are they being changed? How do they react to these experiences? You've used a term in your book that literally sends a lot of nuts and bolts researchers heading for the fields, and that's spiritual. Why did you decide to delve into that?
That is the spiritual aspect, Rosemary, is something I never looked at either. I think a lot of us, when we first start to look into the UFO phenomenon, we do approach it from a nuts and bolts angle. We everything we see on the internet or in books is mostly done by scientists, J. Allen Hynek. The list goes on and on. But we all know that there is definitely something more to this than just nuts and bolts. And a lot of the people in the book, I noticed as I interviewed them, is they're stating that their core religious beliefs, they did not falter after having these experiences. If they were religious or spiritual beforehand, their beliefs, they've remained intact, but they were definitely shifted or altered, amplified even. And when we try to attempt looking at the UFO phenomenon as a scientific problem, we're only limiting ourselves, I believe, the impact it has on humankind. So with science and UFOs, we're really at the lowest rung on the ladder, in my personal opinion. And there were many in the book who had very spiritual awakenings, for sure.
Well, if you go back into the literature of even several decades ago, into the era of the Space Brothers contact, where, beings were said to appear to people with messages and deliver technology and things like that. Those sorts of things still go on today. But from the get-go, it seems that transformation has been a key theme in our contact with non-human intelligence. Why has it been so ignored? What's the resistance?
That you bring up a good point, and we look at the whole contactee era with very skeptical eyes. Some have come forward and have been proven to be hoaxes, which is very unfortunate. We run into this all the time in this field, which is frustrating. But that being said, there are many contactees and those having experiences today, up until today, who claim this. I spoke to one gentleman, Michael Carter, who had a few abduction experiences throughout his life, and he was given images of a lightning bolt with hands that were praying. This completely changed Michael's life, the course of his life, and he became a pastor of a church after that. He was able to shift his worldview of what he once believed in terms of God and infuse these alien, quote-unquote, experiences into his religion, into his spiritualism, and make an entire new life out of that. So right there, you have a change that completely altered the path of one man's life. And we see this time and time again with these people. And to me, that's very exciting. It's something I want to look further into. And I think that's where the field of ufology is heading. We're getting away from nuts and bolts, and we're moving into the brain, into consciousness, into the heart. And, I spoke with Bob Davis, one of your colleagues at Free, and we had a long conversation about these ideas of the patterns we're seeing in these experiencers and what they're bringing forward. And to me, that's invigorating. And it may take decades and decades or even centuries for us to even begin to crack the code on this. But I think this is where ufology is heading, and I definitely want to be there for that ride.
So what's going to happen to the nuts and bolts people who don't want to go in this direction? Is there still something for them, or are they going to become like dinosaurs in the field?
I believe that it's definitely something we have to work in tandem with. We need scientific research into ufology. It is essential, in my opinion. It is the only thing that the mainstream media is going to is going to look at when they're not making sensational claims or smirking, with the X-Files music. I don't think nuts and bolts ufology will ever die off. We have the old guard, as it were, who I personally have learned so much from. So my job, I feel, as a younger ufologist, is to build upon that. Never would I want to step away from nuts and bolts. Again, if we can find trace evidence of a craft that landed, or some sort of evidence that a abductee or experiencer brings forward, we need that. It may be all we have to rely on, but as a journalist, as an author, I rely on stories, and these stories continue, and they're multiplying, and there's something to be said for that. Whether it's a sociological thing, I can't say for sure, but more and more people are coming forward. They're more comfortable coming forward, and I think that's an evolution of ufology itself. It is becoming more accepted in the mainstream, I might add, and I don't know about you, Rosemary, but that's exciting. I suppressed so much of this part of my life as a child growing up, and to now fully embrace it and see that people are open to it, I think we're headed in a good direction. And I think let's say the consciousness aspect of ufology, the spiritual aspect, and the scientific aspect all have to work together. And I think that's what something like Free is doing, and all the people who contribute to that.
Free is certainly endeavoring to bring together researchers from a variety of disciplines with a special emphasis on science. And this has always been a real prickly area for scientists because so many of them with academic positions or grants that they're getting to pursue hard science research, it's a field that becomes very problematic for them to be associated with. And fortunately, we've had more and more scientists who've been willing to at least comment on the field instead of slamming the door in the face of researchers like us. And I'm with you, Ryan. I've always thought that the key to what's going on is in the experience. And yes, we do need the hard data, but this is a field that defies conventional research. And the aspect of consciousness seems to be very key as well. What happens to the transformation of an individual's consciousness and their ability to expand consciousness beyond the physical realm in order to have these experiences? That's where I think a lot of the meat of the research is going to be. And of course, this is all very soft evidence from the hard science perspective, and anecdotal evidence is not taken seriously because it's anecdotal. And yet that's where we find so many intriguing patterns. And what about the patterns that you found in your research? You looked at a lot of lights in the sky cases and abductions. What sort of common ground were you able to identify?
That is a wonderful question. I have to admit that first and foremost, the patterns I found, at least with the people I interviewed, they're messy. There's not one box I could put anything into. But like you mentioned, right now, Rosemary, the idea of consciousness seems to play a huge role. I mean, I spoke to a man in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, who saw a huge delta-shaped craft over a drive-in movie theater. He witnessed this with dozens and dozens of other people. And as they watched this thing float over the drive-in movie theater, they all just stood there in awe, watched it float over their heads, disappear, and then everything goes back to normal. But what was most interesting is that nobody spoke about what they just saw directly after it happened. They went on with going to get refreshments. The movie starts, and they all just start watching it. And this guy gets into his car, watches the movie with his friend, and then they head home, never to speak about the event. He had a trigger event many years later when he saw a UFO in a book, and the memories started rushing in after that, Rosemary. So, like, right there, we have this entire new aspect to a UFO sighting. Is it instant amnesia? Is it missing time? What is this phenomenon doing to our consciousness? Is it messing with it? Is it in control of it? It's fascinating. And there were many other cases like this where people didn't necessarily remember the event as it happened, but many years later. And I can only imagine that's what many of the people who you all have spoken to with Free have come forward with as well.
That's an interesting experience that you gave as an example. And it's sometimes I wonder if people are just sort of stunned into silence, that they just don't know what to make of it. And they might not even be certain that other people around them have shared the experience, because as we know, sometimes a single individual in a group of people can have a sighting and other people will not see it. It's like an individual somehow is able to tune into something that other people are not. So, I think you're right. There's just a whole lot of things going on there. And the more we get this out into public dialogue and examination, I think that's going to help even more people come forward with their experiences as well. You have some cases in the book where just simply seeing lights in the sky have been transforming for individuals. We all know about experiences where people have a very dramatic contact, for example, with alien beings, but simply seeing lights in the sky, that can really bring about a transformation too?
I believe so. I spoke to like you said, the first chapter is literally about just lights in the sky. Now, this can be explained in many different ways, but there are several individuals who had orb sightings, as we've come to learn. This dates back to even the Foo Fighters during the inception of the modern UFO era, along with Kenneth Arnold, like you said earlier. And there was one man who I spoke to who had orbs floating around a bed of water in his backyard. Others witnessed this. He had ongoing sightings of these orbs, and something was unlocked in him. He became an artist after that, after having no prior experience with something like that. He started seeing geometric patterns, and he would create these very elaborate mathematical artist renderings. So right there, you have something simple as perhaps a ball of energy or plasma of some sort doing something. Infusing itself into an individual having the experience and then opening them up. So that was absolutely fascinating to me. There were several other individuals, a pilot included, who had a sighting as he was flying his plane, who was changed after that. Again, never, ever thought about the UFO phenomenon and now believes more than ever that we are not alone.
Ryan, we've got to take a short break right now. I want to pick up a little more on orbs when we come back from the break, as well as some of your thoughts about the new research organizations and course corrections for ufology, what's coming down the pike for us, as well as your thoughts on non-human intelligence and what it is. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Strange Dimensions on KGRA Digital Broadcast Radio, kgraradio.com. Stay with us. We'll be right back with some more exciting conversation with Ryan Sprague.
Hi, folks. Ray Hobbs here for the Ozark Mountain UFO Conference event coming up this April in beautiful Eureka Springs, Arkansas. This is a special year as we celebrate the 30th annual Ozark Mountain UFO Conference, and we are very proud to be able to continue this time-honored tradition created by the late Lou Farish of bringing thought-provoking and new information about other worlds around us. Join us April 14th through the 16th at the Best Western Inn of the Ozarks Convention Center for another great lineup of speakers celebrating so many whom have made this UFO conference tradition such a success, like Linda Moulton Howe, David Marler, Grant Cameron, Kathleen Martin, Travis Walton, Deborah Jordan Cobble, and more. And for the first time ever, Stanton T. Friedman. Reserved seating is still available. Visit OzarkUFOConference.com and get your tickets now. That's OzarkUFOConference.com.
Your UFO paranormal powerhouse of live alternative talk radio. KGRA, The Planet.
Back with my guest tonight, Ryan Sprague, talking about the new directions in ufology and ET contact research. His new book, Somewhere in the Skies, A Human Approach to an Alien Phenomenon, recently out from the Richard Dolan Press. Do pick it up. It's a fascinating overview of contact experiences, abductions, lights in the sky, transformations of consciousness, what scientists, experiencers, and other researchers have to say about it. Definitely a view to the future. Ryan, just before the break, we were talking about lights in the sky sightings and how transformative they were, and the orb phenomenon. And you had mentioned some orbs that were flying around someone's yard. Now, are we distinguishing between another kind of phenomenon and UFOs, or do you think they're interrelated? The balls of light that manifest, for example, in a lot of haunted locations?
That is a wonderful question. What I came across in several of the stories in the book, I have the first chapter about lights in the sky, and then later on, I have an abductee experience where lights were seen in her home. So right there, I think that's the answer. They are interrelated. I don't necessarily think that when we see lights in the sky, we're merely dealing with an extraterrestrial presence. I think there are many natural explanations for things like that. Skeptics or debunkers often turn to ball lightning, but that is a big part of it. It could be that, but the way that these things maneuver, Rosemary, there has to be, in my opinion, some sort of intelligent control. The way these things maneuver, the way they dance and swirl around one another, almost as if choreographed. It's stunning. It's fascinating. I spoke to another gentleman who watched a green ball of energy float over, again, another body of water, which is also something we could make a pattern with, and just sort of float above the surface of the water and then shoot directly up into the sky and disappear. Now, to me, that seems like something intelligent. That doesn't seem like a happenstance or natural phenomena. In terms of something possibly being paranormal, like I said earlier, I spoke to a woman who had a triangular UFO sighting, and then her daughter had a close encounter experience, and then the home started having many aspects of high strangeness. Lights would flicker in the house. They would completely shut off. Balls of light or orbs were seen throughout the home, even by the electrical company who came to investigate and try to fix it. And the gentleman who came to the home actually said he would never return because he had his own experience while in the home as well. So I do think we are dealing with many different phenomena. I don't think this is strictly ET, and I do think they are all interrelated, for sure.
I agree with you 100% on that score. That's something that I've seen in the course of my research as well. And as you know, I delve into the paranormal and cryptids as well as UFOs. I'm involved in metaphysical experiences where people have what they feel to be very spiritual experiences. And it's very difficult to just isolate someone into a single kind of experience. That quite often they have a gamut of experiences that fall outside of any particular field. So it seems to me that the researcher of the future, and that's starting like right now, the researcher of now and the future is literally going to have to be, I guess you could call them a Renaissance man or woman, because they're going to have working knowledge in a lot of different areas in order to try and pull things together. What are your thoughts on that?
That is a perfect observation. I don't think I could state it any more clear than you did. I've had so many paranormal investigators contact me and say, hey, I'm researching this case out in, Kentucky, and they say that they saw an apparition in their home, but then they also said they saw a UFO, a day later or moments after this. So right there, researchers in other realms are contacting me, and I'm considered strictly a UFO researcher, but now I have this in my lap. So what do? Do I ignore the apparition in the home while looking at the UFO? No. They are interrelated somehow, some way, and we have to, as responsible researchers and investigators, we have to acknowledge that. These experiences are far more strange and bizarre than we often give them credit for. And I think instead of denying that or trying to put our ET biased on it, we need to really think about why. Why are these things all happening at the same time? And it seems to me, Rosemary, that these phenomena, they are amorphous. They are whatever we perceive them to be. If you're a religious person, you may see a quote-unquote UFO experience as angelic, demonic. If you are a paranormal person, you may see it as someone who has passed on and is coming back to make contact. If you're a futurist, maybe it's us from the future coming back to warn us of something. The possibilities are endless, and I honestly believe it's the lens in which you perceive it as. So I do see that Renaissance researcher having to truly open themselves up and no longer consider themselves a UFO researcher, a ghost hunter, a cryptid hunter. I think you have to be willing to accept that these things are way more challenging than we think, and that we may never find answers. And we have to be okay with that. In my opinion, the journey is far more exciting than any answer ever will be. And if that answer ever comes, I don't think it's going to be what we want, what we expected. And frankly, I don't think it ever is going to come, but we're going to keep searching.
You know, maybe we need to come up with some new terminology for this new researcher. And I have no candidates at the moment. Maybe we should run a contest or something to call the new broad-based researcher and all of these things. But you touched on something that about answers, getting to the answers. And quite often it seems that the closer you get to what you feel is the truth or finding the explanation for something, the more elusive it becomes. But that continues to power the search as well. And I just want to mention briefly a pet peeve of mine, and that's researchers who stand up at an event to present their latest findings and present really tantalizing data and information, and then throw up their hands and say, I don't know what's going on. Well, that's not helpful. It's not like each of us has to have a definitive, bottom line, never changing answer or truth. But for heaven's sakes, if we're researching and we're trying to provide insight for other researchers and the public to stimulate more discussion and research, let's at least have some ideas. And I'm sorry to say that I had to listen to this a fair amount at the UFO Congress this year. And I think sometimes researchers are afraid to offer opinions because they don't want criticism. They want to have as many fans as possible. So they don't want criticism, or they don't want to be proven wrong at some point. But I think what we've been talking about here, Ryan, in this new researcher, is that we're going to have to maybe even stick our necks out, I guess you could say, at some point. And I think every researcher has to be in a position of saying, well, here's what I think now. Here are my conclusions, my best conclusions based on the evidence I have, and be open to modifying that and changing that.
Often this field or fields can become dangerously self-referential. And like you said, some researchers adhere to the beliefs that they think are in the room at the time. They want that applause. They don't want to be debated. And right there is the issue. You're either playing to a certain crowd, or you're afraid to give your own, not conclusions, but your own opinions, like you said. One of the people I found most fascinating at the Congress this year was Greg Bishop, the author. And he's bringing forth some concepts that are extremely controversial, ones that many nuts and bolts ufologists do not want to look at. And like we said earlier, that is the consciousness aspect, what Bishop coins the co-creation hypothesis, where are humans actually co-creating the phenomena with the phenomena through decades and decades of conditioning of what flying saucers are, what triangles are, what balls of light are? Are we actually manifesting the phenomena into something? Now, that's not to say that it doesn't exist in real time in the physical realm as we see it, but are we sort of in tandem with the phenomenon, riding the wave with it, as it were? I found this deeply fascinating. I saw many people either on the edge of their seats during Bishop's talk, or they leave the room. And right there, that is the sign of a successful talk, in my opinion. If you can offend someone or make them so uncomfortable as to no longer just accept answers that they've been fed for so long, I think you've done your job as a researcher. You're making people think, and you're moving both the field and the conversation forward. So I'm with you. I think we need stronger individuals who I actually see coming forward in the field of ufology are a lot of females who are extremely compassionate with the witnesses that they speak to. And they also have to deal with what is quote unquote a boys club at most times. So they are extremely strong. They have very thick skin, and they are bringing forward new information. So in my opinion, and I may get some flack for this, I do believe that Renaissance investigator will most likely be female. I also think that they are willing to be open to many possibilities. And I hope that I can somehow contribute to that and just keep riding that wave of uncertainty and hopefully answers.
I agree with you. And I did listen to Greg's talk as well. And he's going to be on my show in a few weeks as well. I'm very interested in those points of view that you just brought up. And yes, I think perhaps in many cases, women probe into things in different ways than men do, and they do bring different perspectives. We're certainly interested in a lot of the subtleties that may get overlooked by some men researchers. And I'm not trying to be chauvinistic or sexist or gender biased here. It's just different approaches that all add to the same total picture. And yes, women in ufology have had a struggle over the years. First of all, there haven't been very many women in the field for a long time, and now we're certainly seeing a lot more coming in and more taking the stage as well. And I think that's a very good change as well. It is hard to have, to put out your views and then be criticized for them. And I've certainly had that in my own work over the years. I think anyone who's willing to push out the boundaries is going to encounter that. And there is a tendency in all fields to kind of play it safe. Don't make waves. Just play it safe. And that's got to change if we're ever going to move forward. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things I want to find out your thoughts on is, do we need to redefine what aliens are, what the alien presence is? We've had stereotypes presented in the media. We had the Space Brothers, and we've had the Greys, we've had reptilians. And do those really embody or encompass what most of us are experiencing, or do we have to, just say, look, we've got to completely redefine what non-human intelligence is?
Yeah, I think it is. I think we do. We do have to wipe the board clean. New theories, even new language, like you said earlier. We have the term UFO, which we know conjures so much controversial things. It is often immediately connected to aliens, little green men. And we have this new term that seems to be making its way to the forefront of UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, which is much more accurate to what people are experiencing and witnessing. And I think that is the way to go. We need new language. In terms of the experiencer phenomena, like I said earlier, people are perceiving these things completely differently. Some are seeing it as a angelic experience, others as a terrifying experience with either the Greys or the Reptilians. And it's just such a huge, broad spectrum of experiences that are happening. So what do we do? I think we need to continue hearing these people out and recording their information and not try to lump it into any box. This non-human intelligence could be one of many, many things. And it doesn't necessarily mean it is a flesh and blood alien coming from another solar system, in my opinion.
Where would they be coming from?
Interdimensional. This is a big part that I think a lot of people are looking at. They may possibly be working in tandem with our own existence at this time. And that's where I think the whole idea of consciousness comes in. We're now seeing, in terms of quantum physics, that consciousness may be completely separate from the brain, from the body, and may exist in another dimension. So right there, maybe we have one consciousness traveling through different dimensions and going into a human body, into a cryptid creature of some sort, an alien from Zeta Reticuli. We don't know. This idea of quantum physics is just, it's new. It needs to be refined. It needs to be explored further. And again, while it may be frustrating that I don't have any answers, I think these are things that that we need to continue looking into. And I know people at Free are looking into as well. I spoke to Bob Davis a lot about this, about his work with neuroscience and what the brain is capable of, what it can be, and what that may tell us about what we're dealing with.
I've been convinced for a long time that most of the beings that we're calling ETs are actually interdimensional, that they might even share the planet with us in parallel dimensions, which is, a model in quantum physics, the many worlds theory, and that they have breakthroughs into this reality that seem to come from the skies, or as some people have posited, and I think there's something to this argument, that whatever it is that's been interacting with human beings throughout the entire course of our history has just adapted and shape-shifted itself to our interest in space and space technology. And people aren't looking for fairy mountains so much anymore. And beings that live in caves and below the earth, but we've got our attention focused on the skies. And so we might be dealing with something that just morphs itself to adapt to human expectation and the kinds of experiences that excite us and that we can accommodate. You can imagine that centuries ago, beings coming from space might not have been as well understood as beings coming out from inner Earth.
That is a wonderful point. I mean, you could even look at the work of Jacques Vallée or even Carl Jung, the psychologist, who say that UFOs are an extension of our post-war anxieties, or like you said, our exploration of space, that constant search for an other. Jung even goes so far as to say that it's an absence of God in our lives that makes us want to think there is an other out there, a non-human intelligence. So we could look at that. We could look at the work of Vallée in terms of folklore. Like you mentioned, we no longer see fairies. We no longer see fae. We see Greys. We see reptilians. Again, a fascinating subtopic of the UFO phenomenon. And I think UFOs can be connected to all of these, Rosemary, philosophically, sociologically, psychologically, and hard sciences as well. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Ufology itself could provide that common ground thread that connects all of these different kinds of experiences. And I think that's a bold new frontier for this field to go into. It does seem to go around in circles a lot. We've had so many organizations and individuals who get off the ground with a lot of promise and there's a lot of excitement, and then things just disintegrate. Something happens to the individuals, they leave the field, something else might happen to them to push them out of the field. Organizations that gain a lot of strength, suddenly start crumbling from internal dissension or some other kind of force. Some exciting organizations like Free, you mentioned UFOTOG 2 and UFO Data as some other entries in the field. Can you just describe briefly what's going on with we talked about Free, what's happening with the other two and what they're contributing to the field?
Yes, absolutely. As for UFOTOG, this is a more of a nuts and bolts scientific approach. We have two individuals who are looking at it from a photographic and a data-oriented thing. What they want to do is first track a UFO event as it's happening, and then send out a remote vehicle of some sort with the highest form of radar analysis, data recording, and photo analysis. Send this thing out as the event is happening and record it from every angle. Again, photographically, with data, with radar, and then analyze the event from there. Something like UFO Data, we're actually going out into the atmosphere, and we're using satellites to do the same thing of sorts, to look for UFO events in space before they even reach our planet, and do this again, feedback information about what it is, what it could be. So this is very exciting. These are very small crowd-funded groups, I might add, not government-funded. So right there, you have the passion, I think, at the forefront. And that's going to keep these people invigorated to continue their work. They have no oversight by the government. They are completely privately funded and crowd-funded. And I think that's very important. As for groups like Free, we also have Zero with Yvonne Smith. And these are groups that have stood the tests of time. Zero's been going on for a while now. People are, sharing their information. I know for a fact that Yvonne has spoken to people at Free, or Kathleen Martin has spoken to people here. And I think that's very exciting. We have these people sharing information, no longer saving it for themselves for a rainy day fund. We know, Rosemary, there's not a lot of money in these topics. So
none.
Exactly. So why not share our information? There's no reason to keep it to yourself. So yeah, again, I would look at things like Free, UFOTOG, UFO Data, and Zero as shining examples of what an organization can do and how they can first brush aside personality attacks and make the information the most important thing.
I do hope that some of these new endeavors can transcend what we've seen in the past that I just mentioned, where things get off the ground in a very promising way and then get thwarted somehow. And this has happened in other fields involving paranormal phenomena. And I wonder if there's just something inherent to the nature of these almost trickster-like phenomena that we're dealing with, trying to grab the tail of, that have a way of shaking us off at some point. How do researchers anticipate this and gird themselves against it?
I had so many people come up to me at the Congress, Rosemary, and say, it's so good to see a younger person as passionate as you are. And first of all, I find that very flattering. I've always been a very high energy, caffeinated individual. But they told me, I'm 70 years old. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I've found no answers. So it's good to see younger people getting involved. So I think that is essential. I think we need to get younger people involved in these topics and then infuse them into these organizations. So right there, you have someone on the ground floor who is willing to take the punches, willing to continue that search for the individuals who may be exhausted, may be frustrated, and either spark a new flame in them or pass the torch on. I've had so many individuals who come up to me and say, like, oh, you should join MUFON or you should join Free. And yes, I would love to be involved with all of these. It depends on schedules. It depends on how much time an individual has. But if you're willing to even make a small contribution to these organizations, I think as a younger person, it's going to make all the difference in the world. You're going to take the information you learn and you're going to build upon it. And that is the only way we're going to continue to thrive and to find any type of answers.
You've touched on something that is perplexing paranormal organizations of all kinds, and I'm using the term paranormal as all-inclusive, have been grappling with this for some years now, is how to bring young researchers and enthusiasts into the field. And it seems that, you go to the conferences and you look at the organizations, and some that had huge numbers of members in the past have dwindled with the aging of the membership. Conferences, some of them have shrunk in size or even had difficulty continuing on. Mainly because there's no steady stream of new people coming into the field. And you're probably going to wind up being a spokesperson and a point person on this, having gained the visibility that you have for how do we do this? We've all been struggling with it. How do you interest a couple of generations of younger people who are now accustomed to getting their information whenever they want it, off the internet, off their smartphones, live streaming on YouTube. They don't need to go to a conference or join an organization. How do we keep these endeavors and these organizations and research efforts in motion with vitality when we seem to be having a fracturing going on in the very audience itself?
Yeah, there is definitely a huge, not only age gap, but the younger people, they're constantly staring at their phones instead of up in the sky. So I think what we have to do is find ways to communicate with them. And again, that will come with the internet. I have started another endeavor with Jason and Maureen, currently, from Open Minds. And we started doing podcasts, a lot like what you're doing. And that's what younger people like. They like that constant bombardment of information. They need it. They crave it. And if we can be there constantly to give that to them, maybe that's going to convince them to come out to a conference or to a Skywatch. Like you said, if they want to know if a UFO case is a hoax or not, they're going to go on the internet, Google it, and they'll either get their answer from there or they'll be dissuaded somewhere else. What we need to do is get them out looking into the sky and be like, oh my God, there is something anomalous going on up there. I just did not take the time to actually do that. I do see a lot of younger people interested. It's just a matter of directing them in the right places. The internet can be a very murky place, a dangerous place even, but it can also be a very exciting and credible place. So as long as we can steer them in the right directions, I think we will start to see more younger people involved. And I think that is the only thing that is going to keep these fields, UFOs, paranormal, cryptids, going.
Ryan, we're coming up in the final minutes of the show here. We've covered so much ground and so much more. Do you have some new projects in the works? What's ahead for you?
Yeah, I do. I actually, this May, I will be having an essay published along with Greg Bishop and many other researchers about exactly what we talked about tonight. It is called UFOs Reframing the Debate. So it is essentially what we talked about tonight. How can we infuse new language, new ideas, forward thinking into this field and make it something new, make it something fresh, make a new conversation. That'll be coming out from White Crow Press in the coming months. So I have more information about that on my website. And other than that, I'll be giving a few lectures later in 2017. And I'm also working over at rogueplanet.tv. That's where you can find UFO Mod Pod, the podcast with Jason and Maureen. So a lot on my plate. I love staying busy. I love this topic, and it's something I think I will always be involved with. And I just hope I don't get exhausted like some of the people out there. But it's people like you, Rosemary, who keep me going. So Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, Ryan. We've got to close the show tonight. You are a true Renaissance researcher. I really enjoyed talking with you. Somewhereintheskies.com is the website to go to, folks. You've been listening to Strange Dimensions. I'm your host, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, KGRA Radio, digital broadcasting, kgraradio.com. See you next week with another exciting show. Stay tuned for Jimmy Church and Fade to Black. I'll see you on down the paranormal road.